At 9:47 p.m. hours local time over the Donbass region, an AGM-88 HARM missile streaked through the sky at 2,100 miles per hour. The culmination of 6 hours spent positioning its launch platform for precisely this moment. A single strike against a fortified radar installation commanding Russian air defenses across 3 oblasts. Everything appeared routine. Then, the ESM display erupted, with an emitter the crew had desperately hoped to slip past. What they didn't know, 2 Pantsir S-1 systems the reconnaissance confirmed destroyed 10 days ago were very much operational. The cockpit went silent, the kind of silence where your own heartbeat fills your helmet. The weapons officer was already working the problem. He pulled the first Russian radar's position, a Nebo-M, from the Threat Analysis Module. The F-16's electronic warfare suite, essentially a system that identifies every radar hunting them and overlays it on navigation, came alive. The Nebo-M is Russia's long-range VHF early warning radar, the kind that searches for aircraft like a floodlight scanning a parking lot. That floodlight was on, and the parking lot stretched across 2 Ukrainian oblasts. Viper 12 was threading the southern edge. The null zone was razor-thin, an 8-mile corridor squeezed between the Nebo-M's effective beam and a second early warning radar, 45 miles west, that hadn't picked them up yet. Stay clean through this gap, and the VHF return drops below the confidence threshold. Miss it, and the F-16 becomes a solid track on the next sweep. He called the correction to the pilot. 4 degrees left. The pilot adjusted without speaking. In the cockpit, communication happens through hand signals and brief phrases. No radio traffic to the refueling tanker. No check-ins with forward air control. No updates from the HIMARS teams running electronic warfare 120 miles south. The ground crews with resources to help don't even know they're needed. And honestly, that single radio transmission would light up every Russian signals intelligence receiver west of the Dnieper, an entire network of listening posts cataloging everything that broadcasts into Ukrainian airspace. One call from Viper 12, and every surviving intercept station knows exactly which patch of sky to focus on. They solve this with what's inside the cockpit, or they don't solve it at all. The Nebo-M swept across them. The threat module registered signal strength peaking as the beam passed through their sector, then fading. The weapons officer watched the next sweep approach on the rotation timer, 6 seconds between passes. The pilot held the corrected heading steady, guiding Viper 12 through the coverage gap at 28,000 feet and 480 miles per hour. The beam swept again. Signal peaked, faded. The weapons officer exhaled sharply. That return was weaker than the last one. The null zone was holding. Geometry was opening as they pressed north. But VHF early warning doesn't require a solid track to cause damage. The consequences were already multiplying behind them. The F-16 carries a radar cross-section of roughly 0.5 square meters, about the size of a metal drum. An aircraft spanning 50 feet, yet Russia's radars saw a ghost. A very fast ghost, hauling 2 hours of fuel and a wing-mounted AGM-88 package. The F-16C Fighting Falcon, General Dynamics single-engine fighter. 50 feet of composite airframe, roughly the distance from the pitcher's mound to home plate. Built to deliver 7,700 pounds of weapons through defended airspace while remaining undetected. Radar cross-section, 0.5 square meters. Combat radius, 925 nautical miles with external tanks. Unit cost, $62 million per airframe. Over 3,000 ever built. This is what Ukraine deploys when radars must fall. and survival means threading impossible needles. Russia has been hunting this aircraft with everything left in its arsenal, and the Black Sea returns better radar signatures than the F-16 does. Stealth isn't a cloaking device. It's whispering in a room full of people shouting. The radar pulse goes out at full volume, but what bounces back is so faint it vanishes into background noise. A Russian early warning operator caught a faint return. One sweep invisible, the next sweep gone. Third sweep, a ghost heading north at medium altitude. 3 weeks into the counteroffensive, a low-confidence contact tracking toward Zaporizhia doesn't get filed away and forgotten. Here's why that ghost appeared at all. The F-16 was engineered to defeat fire control radars, the X-band and Ku-band systems SAM batteries use to guide missiles. VHF operates differently. The wavelengths are physically long, matching the F-16's fuselage and control surfaces. When a radar wave matches the dimensions of what it's hitting, stealth shaping stops working as designed. The wave doesn't slide off, it bounces. Hiding behind a chain-link fence works fine when someone searches with a laser pointer. The beam passes through the gaps. That logic fails when they flood the area with a barn door-sized spotlight. VHF radar is that barn door spotlight. The Nebo-M can't generate fire control data, just bearing and approximate altitude. But that's more than sufficient to direct every surviving SAM battery in the region exactly where to concentrate their efforts. The report propagated through surviving landlines to Zaporizhia Air Defense Command, and a sector alert went out to every battery covering the northern approach. The crew had threaded the null zone cleanly, but the ghost they left on the Nebo-M's scope was already communicating with everyone who mattered. And the target that brought Viper 12 across 6 hours of Ukrainian airspace under total radio silence still sat 42 miles north, a radar complex near Molochna, Zaporizhia. Early warning systems, fire control radars, command bunkers, an entire electronic infrastructure coordinating Russian strikes across 3 fronts. The AGM-88 missiles mounted on the wing pylons weren't doing anyone any good until they arrived at their destination. 35 minutes of contested airspace separated Viper 12 from weapons release. Like carrying a weapon system worth a city block through occupied territory. Now, with the entire surviving Russian air defense network approximately knowing which direction to look. The next 18 minutes unfolded quietly. 140 miles of airspace, where the threat module showed nothing but distant radars well below detection threshold. The pilot worked through the approach checklist, while the weapons officer monitored the inertial navigation system, accurate to within meters. Outside the cockpit, at 28,000 feet, there was nothing to see except thin air. Just the hum of a single F-100 turbofan engine pushing a fighter through the atmosphere at high subsonic speed. The kind of silence that sharpens a crew's hearing. Because in an F-16, trouble never announces itself visually first. It comes as a tone from the threat module that you feel in your teeth before your brain processes it. Then a new emitter appeared on the scope, and it wasn't an early warning radar. Acquisition radar, bearing 190, range 55 kilometers, classified as Pantsir S-1, NATO designation SA-22, Greyhound. This battery shouldn't exist. Satellite imagery from 10 days prior showed its original position as a burning wreck, and no one scheduled a follow-up reconnaissance pass. But the launcher components sat here now, in a hidden position south of Molochna. The same crew that extracted them from the rubble 8 days ago had pointed their missiles directly at the Corridor Coalition aircraft had been using all week. They hadn't been hiding from the war, they'd been studying it. The Pantsir S-1 battery commander received the sector alert on his encrypted radio terminal. He had 6 missiles remaining. The moment he activated his radar, every AGM-88 within 140 kilometers would pinpoint his location. If the contact proved real and he acquired a track, he shot. If it was a ghost and he illuminated for nothing, he'd just broadcast his home address to every Ukrainian aircraft in the region. The weapons officer called a heading change without waiting for the second sweep. 12 degrees west, nose pointed directly at the Pantsir acquisition radar. The signal weakened on the threat module as the aspect angle sharpened and the range increased. He wasn't relaxing for a reason. The Pantsir didn't stop searching, and it didn't stop transmitting to the network. What the threat module had been tracking for the past 75 seconds was the Pantsir S-1, Russian-designed 2010s vintage, the system most analysts categorize as genuinely dangerous. Its 5.7E6 missile stretched roughly 9 feet long, weighed 600 kilograms, and carried a 15-kilogram warhead past Mach 3 to ranges exceeding 20 kilometers, further than the distance from downtown Kiev to the airport. The acquisition radar operates in X-band, active radar, essentially shouting into darkness and listening for the echo. The F-16's stealth shaping reduces this frequency, but can't defeat it at close range. The crew just spent 90 seconds proving that this system could find them at 55 kilometers. The American taxpayer built a $62 million aircraft to counter this missile. And right now, that missile's radar was constructing a precise picture of exactly where that $62 million aircraft was concealed. The Pantsir's radar data flowed through the same encrypted links that transmitted the original NEBO-M alert. The sector refreshed with fire control data, confirming the target was real, heading for Malakna and evading. The heading change purchased distance from the Pantsir, but simultaneously signaled every surviving battery that something worth pursuing was inbound. 90 seconds later, the threat module painted a new emitter at bearing 260. Intermittent pulses with decreasing intervals as somebody narrowed a beam toward the F-16's sector. The APR-39 classified it as an S-300PS fire control radar, the acquisition system of a Russian SAM battery east of Malakna. The APR-39 is the F-16's threat library. It receives a radar pulse, cross-references the waveform fingerprint against every known emitter in the database, and tells the crew exactly what's hunting them. The S-300PS works like a motion sensor floodlight on your garage. It only triggers if something passes through its beam. Finding a fighter with a floodlight alone is impossible, but someone had just told it exactly where to look. The NEBO-M gave it the neighborhood. The Pantsir gave it the street. The S-300 was going door to door. Here's the problem with no clean solution. Turning west positioned the F-16 nose-on to the Pantsir, minimizing the radar return against that acquisition system. But nose-on to the Pantsir meant beam-on to the S-300, presenting a significantly larger cross-section to the more capable system. Every heading degree favoring one threat exposed the aircraft to the other, like trying to hide from your wife and your mother-in-law at the same family dinner. Turning away from one puts you face-to-face with the other, and both have questions. Inside the S-300PS battery, the commander watched his display as the fire control radar swept the sector in progressively narrower passes. He couldn't confirm what he was seeing, but he'd spent 3 weeks watching Ukrainian strikes obliterate everything around him while keeping his radar dark, preserving his battery for a target justifying the risk. If something significant enough to fly solo toward Malakna was inbound tonight, it would traverse his sector. He narrowed his beam. The weapons officer activated the electronic countermeasure suite, the active side of F-16 stealth. Located inside the fuselage, these modules captured the S-300 radar pulses and rebroadcast them with calculated delay and frequency shift. The result flooded the S-300 screen with ghost targets that looked convincing enough to ruin the track. Against older radar systems, the ECM would create a flawless fake, miles away from the actual aircraft. The S-300 was smarter than that. It cross-checked its own work, comparing returns from different beam angles. You couldn't fool it cleanly, but you could make the picture murky enough that it couldn't lock on. The S-300 threat indicator shifted from solid to intermittent on the threat module, and the weapons officer watched it flicker. The ECM bought time, but it made everything worse. The system was radiating. Jamming emissions are detectable by any signals intelligence receiver with line of sight. The aircraft designed to be invisible had just become the loudest thing in Zaporizhzhia, on the S-300's frequency band. The most expensive whisper in military history had transformed into a shout. Every surviving signals intelligence station within 80 miles now had a bearing on active jamming at medium altitude over the sector. The Pantsir crew, whose track had been fading, received a fresh, ELINT-derived bearing and swung their acquisition radar back onto target. The S-300 got a cross-reference, confirming aircraft actively jamming at this bearing. The jamming protecting the F-16 from one radar was handing its position to every other sensor in the network. Three sources converging: VHF from Nebo-M, X-band from the Pantsir, ELINT from the F-16's own electronic warfare suite. One target. The aircraft that crossed the border 75 minutes ago now possessed a three-dimensional address, and the crew was 3 minutes from weapons release. 2 minutes to weapons release. The weapons officer finished the final targeting